So here's our esteemed panel. Thank you very much, every one of you, for being with us. Let's give them a round. So I just can't thank you enough. Of course, it's these guys that make the conference, really, and so you surpass my expectations, and we love you very much for traveling out here and giving of your minds and your hearts to what we're trying to do here. So thank you. So here's our all-speaker panel. What we'll do is let's start with a brief comment from each one, just to kind of ground them and us, and refresh us maybe on what they spoke, if they spoke yesterday, or comment on the conference for that matter, and just get us going. And then we'll switch immediately to open discussion and questions and answers, and I'll come down here and field your questions. Okay? So Nicholas, maybe we'll start on your end. Did you want to make a small, a sentence or so, just to say hi? You can pass the baton if you don't want to.
I can say hi, but I don't have any specific comments on the conference at this point, so I'd rather just get into the Q&A.
Perfect.
In the context of everything that went on this last few days, what I presented is a really very narrow, focused approach to understanding one of the possible therapeutic applications of psilocybin in the context of neurogenesis in particular. But, I'm someone that is humbled by the vast experiences and perspectives provided by the different individuals. I really enjoyed seeing things presented from different levels of analysis, from the anthropologist's point of view, the legal point of view, cognitive psychologist's point of view. And the fact of the matter is that the more levels of analysis that we take, the greater we understand. In fact, understand means you're going to another level of analysis. When I explain something, I'm going to another plane, another dimension. And there's something about these experiences that are multiplanar, and that's why this sense of unity of cosmic consciousness is, for me, the most important component of it. And that's what gives it a mystical kind of component of it. But from a neurologist's point of view, I think there are other applications. I still like the idea of using this. This was my fantasy from the moment I had one of these experiences when I was in my 20s, that there's got to be a utility for this beyond cosmic consciousness, which for me is the most important phenomenon, the most important experience, but there's still more that we have to learn about these substances that could benefit all of mankind.
Me too. That we weren't given the opportunity of cosmic consciousness and not have it all the time for no reason. And so going up the levels and down the levels and up the planes and down the planes seems to me, I think for everyone on this panel, the most fun we've ever had. And some of us make a living. I also would like to thank, whether they are here or not, all the spirits.
Yeah.
Especially the spirits that are pervading New York and are going out and awakening the planet.
Me three. I've really enjoyed the talks. I think it's just echoing the other comments that the integration from trace conditioning and neurogenesis to phenomenology and anthropology is just the type of thing that makes this type of meeting really interesting. And in particular, I think the last talk we saw was just a really great example of that. I was fascinated the whole time about this integration between the cognitive psychology perspective and what we know from our material evidence, and then drawing inferences to the experiential, and then speculating on the philosophy behind that. So I very much enjoyed it, and thank you.
I want to say again that I'd be very happy if people want to come to the MAPS conference, the 25th anniversary. We're going to have an ayahuasca researchers meeting we're trying to stimulate people that are involved in research to go to this meeting, because we're going to lobby Rick Dobling for a big ayahuasca conference in 2013 in the US. So if you can all come, that would be great.
Where? Where is it being held?
I also want to say that I have a newsletter in my website that if you want to join, it's nice. I send some news out. And what I want to say is, I think the role of anthropology is to look in these traditional uses of these plant-based medicines and try to look how other cultures relate to the use of drugs and what can we learn with them. I think this is a great lesson, and we can see that these substances are used in process of learning, of transmission of knowledge, of socialization of the youth, of building cultural and ethnic identity, of pleasure, of kind of social lubricant, and there's many different ways to relate to the substance than the one our culture tell us to. So I think this is a important journey for us interested in these substances, is to look on how other cultures use it.
Thank you.
And finally, I want to say to the scientific researchers. No, I just think that the researchers should take a political stand on the drug war.
I think this is inspiring. And whenever I go to a conference like this, like the MAPS conference or this, it is really inspiring to see so many people getting together to talk about something that is so important and has been ignored for so long. I would be remiss to my family if I did not urge everyone here to buy a copy of my book. It is Singing to the Plants. It's available on Amazon. There are people here who have copies and might show them to people. And I just had a wonderful time. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, just to remind you, I work for MAPS and I help to manage the clinical trials for MAPS. We have a very medicalized view of psychedelics at the moment at MAPS, but that's not to say that we're not multidisciplinary. We actually have anthropologists studying how we do clinical trials. In addition, I just wanted to put a little plug in to support the 25th anniversary, because we're actually kicking off our psychedelic education program, or PEP, at the 25th anniversary. It's a certificate program, so anybody who's interested in becoming a therapist eventually in a psychedelic clinic would be able to take classes through this program. And we're also looking at offering neuroscience classes that would be relevant for psychedelics as well. So thank you very much for hosting us. Neil, thank you especially for making the effort to accommodate me and my family. Thanks.
I spoke about visual art, the influence on visual art last night. I just wanted to pick up on that, the question of the three levels of reality, whether there's real reality or unreality, and that there's this in-between realm, the second bucket, so to speak, that I think that it's a mistake to try to literalize too much what visionary experience represents, because then then it becomes incumbent upon us to conform to whatever we think it points to. I think that these kind of substances amplify something, a function of mind, of creative imagination, that creates intense kinds of experiences, but they're different for every person, and how we negotiate what sort of different kinds of visions different people have is where the politics come in. But I think literalizing is and saying this bottle has a particular spirit in it is not helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Does Roy? We left you out. Would you like to make a comment, a little statement, or should we go to Q&A? No, it's just if you wanted to introduce yourself and say hi.
Just a quick opener.
Well, I think the other speakers are more deeply spiritually evolved than I am. My spirituality is to kick the shit out of the prohibitionists. That was good. I think I'll stop. That is the reality. You're all here essentially for the same reasons, from the audience to the neuropsychologists, all the scientists, all of the studies going on. Basically, underneath it all, we all have the same goal, and that's, like I said, kick the shit out.
Thank you, Roy. Okay, so who wants to participate in this mindset we have up here? Who wants to add their voice or question for any of the speakers?
I'm curious about your views about the technological stuff that has happened in the last 50 years due to psychedelics, people taking psychedelics like DNA, Steve Jobs, stuff like that.
Okay. The technology, the fact that it's influenced people in material ways, creativity perhaps. Comments from the panel?
Since I brought that stuff up, very simple way, in one way of understanding spirituality, the question is asked, what is not God? The answer is anything that you suggest is wrong. So that the idea that there is a distinction between Steve Jobs going to an ashram, coming back with his head shaved, saying he's a Buddhist and taking LSD, and making the iPhone, seem to me indistinguishable at one level of reality. At one level down, where most of us live, we make all these little cut marks as if something ends and something begins. We do it we call things an event. This starts and then ends. That's simply not true. Nothing ever starts and nothing ever ends, but we make the cut marks in order to chat with one another. And I think it's important that we continue to chat with one another, but not lose track of the arbitrary nature of that chat.
There's been two books that go to what you're talking about. A new one called How the Hippies Saved Physics, and also What the Dormouse, which is about a group of people who were enthusiastic psychedelic users who made a case for quantum physics in the 70s, and Fritz Capra came out of that group. But it doesn't explain, it puts the two together, psychedelics and physics research, but it doesn't explain why, how they were connected, or if they were actually connected. And I don't really know how, but I mean, my field is art, and I think the connections have to do with the ability to shift imaginatively from different realities and to entertain possible realities in some vivid, nearly real way. But I think it's influenced lots of innovative disciplines, philosophy for one thing, and I'm sure that there's lots of good historical research to do on that.
I just want to say something really quick. As a molecular biologist by training, I'm definitely familiar with Watson and Francis Crick, and actually I think the basis of their model of how DNA replicates itself was not really based on actual data. They took someone else's data and then, which was Rosalind Franklin, and reinterpreted it to come up with a model on how DNA can replicate itself. So I feel like the role of psychedelics in that process, in that creative process, was not to generate data and then look at it and interpret it as in a linear fashion. It was more thinking about a question intensely with intention for a long amount of time, figuring it out only because they were able to look at it in a nonlinear fashion without really, being able to draw a linear conclusion about it. So, and that's actually something that we kind of see in our clinical trials as well, is our investigators think that the subjects that are in our studies are able to think about their trauma in a nonlinear fashion and without really talking about it directly, but kind of spiraling around it. And so that's how it may help. Thanks.
In comparison to other psychedelics, Dr. Rick Strassman has proposed that the brain physically craves DMT. Do you feel that it craves it in comparison to other psychedelics more?
Does the brain crave DMT?
Does the brain have a special affinity for DMT as opposed to other chemicals?
There has been a lot of speculation about endogenous DMT. And Jace Connolly and Rick Strassman have done a lot of speculating about DMT as being produced in the pineal gland and as being the source of dreaming. Rick Strassman has speculated that at conception and at death there is a rush of DMT and that near-death experiences are due to endogenous DMT. These are all pretty much speculation, and there was an article written by a bunch of researchers in Wisconsin a couple of years ago that I think has actually put to rest a lot of the questions about endogenous DMT, because I think they pretty persuasively came up with both the ligand and the receptor, and that DMT now is apparently the endogenous substance that links to a receptor in the cell called sigma-1, and does not apparently have anything to do with dreams or visions or near-death experiences, but has to do with modulating intercellular communication throughout the body, not just in the nervous system. And that's a big disappointment, but that seems to be where the facts are. And it's not surprising that there's DMT in the body. The body is filled with tryptamines. We have, in human urine, we have bufotenine. We have toad hallucinogens in our urine, because it's another tryptamine. Our body just churns out tryptamines. And in this particular case, it seems that DMT has a function that is not in any apparent way connected with cognition or perception. It's a shame.
Weigh in just on that. Just a comment about those findings. Just I think I just wanted to throw out there that it's more. It's not uncommon at all. It's typical for there to be many, biological processes that a singular substance or whatever we're talking about, receptors, to mediate. And although I can't speak definitively to it, I've had some neuropharmacologist colleagues who know more about the intricacies of the brain in these processes than I do, suggest that the levels that they didn't. They're skeptical whether the amounts that were studied would have relevance to physiological levels of DMT. So they were skeptical. And these are folks that are very knowledgeable about hallucinogens. Just throwing that out there. I'm still just curious. It's a big mystery to me. Yeah.
I think if you wanted to find out whether DMT was released in the body during peak experiences of one sort or another, it'd be easy enough to test for. As a matter of fact, one of the things Rick Strassman is working on now, which I think will be very valuable, is assays for minute amounts of DMT in the body, and I think that will be very helpful. And I think, and I forgot what I was going to say because I got off on Rick.
I have a question. It's a Terence McKenna kind of Rupert Sheldrake kind of question, which is Rupert Sheldrake, I think, thinks that the universe is alive and the laws of physics are evolving as we the universe, create it itself, whatever. As opposed to a view that as our brains get more complex, we tune in to the complexity of the universe or multiverse that is already there. Does anybody have any thoughts about that?
Whether we create the universe or whether we come to better perceive it over time?
I don't think there's a way we can test that hypothesis.
I think these are great metaphysical questions. My boss in Germany, he's always asking me, what is it that we see in ayahuasca visions? And, you know, I'm happy that I don't have that answer and I keep my job. I think that, to me, it's more about human rights, and, you know, I think we have to get down to the earth. Independent of anything, it's about human rights, it's about animal rights, and it's about plant rights. Because the plants are also alive, they have right to their lives. And the drug war is a species war that is after plants. Want to kill them and eliminate them from Earth. So I prefer that kind of line of...
Other thoughts?
So I guess I have one response, which is more like an observational response. I think either way, whether you put it in terms of the brain creates or sort of tunes into this overly complex universe, or it's the other way around, they're both naturalist forms of, well, it's some kind of cosmology, right? But they're both naturalist, and they resemble religious thought, but they do not have a supernatural creator in there. And I guess that does pose an interesting question to the legal and regulatory debate, because you see more and more forms of spirituality emerging in the past 50 or 60 years, and I think psychedelics have played a significant role in that, which are naturalist in one sense, but also, so they're basically naturalist forms of spirituality that do without a belief in a supernatural creator that is completely taken out of the world and interfering from above, or however you want to put it. And now, the question is, to what extent is that recognizable as a religion? Because I guess part of the problem that we've seen this morning is that on the one hand, there is the therapeutic model, the medical model, and on the other hand, there is the religious model in the strict sense, but it's a very kind of, I don't want to say old-fashioned, because of course sort of traditional institutionalized religions live on, but at the same time we've also seen alternative forms of spirituality emerging in the past 50 years, and they're not really accommodated, neither by the model of churches nor by the model of, or they require some kind of supernatural. But there seems to be some sort of third category that is not really part of the regulatory process, and then the question is how to deal with that, how to deal with unchurched spirituality or with naturalist forms of mysticism, for example.
I've got a brief thought on this. You were talking about how our brains are evolving, and what strikes me is that at some level, our goal is to go back to the ancient practices and to take down some of the institutions that have impeded the continuation of those practices. So I'm for not saying that we are more advanced now. In many ways, we're not.
Does anyone feel that the spiritual model ever gets in the way of the physical model when it comes to research, and is a hindrance towards that?
I think it can make it more difficult for sure, but it makes it infinitely interesting too. So.
I actually want to kind of speak to this. So in our LSD-assisted psychotherapy for end-of-life anxiety study in Switzerland, we actually have been kind of experimenting with designing a clinical trial that's kind of informed by spirituality. And so essentially we're, working with people who are very close to death, and puts them in kind of a heightened awareness of, the end of their lives. And a lot of people are anxious because of it. And so I do feel that spirituality can have a place within the physical model, because it's, we're often talking about disorders that are not directly treatable. And so I think that's why psychedelics are so powerful, is because you can use them to look at things in a different way, which is the point I made earlier. But I do think that spirituality cannot be ignored either, because when people entirely ignore their spirituality, then they are in a place of apathy, and they're not going to have the support and the mental support and the emotional support that they would need when they're close to death. So I think there it's especially poignant.
There's a question to Roy. Do you think that because it's becoming more popular and the ceremonies that are happening actually in the city of New York, do you think that we should be prepared for something to happen where they may be busted, I guess you would say, and are the participants perhaps going to be taken away, like in your experience with what's been happening in the rest of the country? Should participants write their lawyer's phone number in their arm and stuff like that?
Are you talking about ayahuasca ceremonies or Santo Daime or UDV? Okay, so your question, I think, is what you can do to prepare for the possibility of a bust.
Is it likely to happen now?
Well, I think that the history of the last 2 years, there have been some interceptions of ayahuasca. There are 3 examples I'm aware of where the people who were busted were set free. They confiscated the tea and let it be known that, if they're busted again, forget it. And so, the issue about engaging in a practice underground, if you believe in the practice enough, you go ahead and you do what you need to do. The real question that you're asking is how to create or articulate a structure that falls within, the definition of the cases. So is there a valid religion? Is the practice central to the religion? And does the government have a compelling interest? I don't think the government has much that they can do any longer to suggest that the government has a compelling interest. But I think that the issue for ayahuasca now is the one I talked about earlier, which is to develop a new language that is consistent with the intent of protecting spiritual versus religious rights. And again, I'm sorry I didn't bring this case with me. I was going to copy it and give it to people because it talks about all the different practices. The short answer to your question is, in my view, anybody who is practicing some religion or some spiritual practice that to protect yourselves, you want to give that a context. And so the context that I have offered to people doing ayahuasca, particularly if they have people from Peru who are ayahuascarios, is to get the historical framework that shows the lineage so that you appear to be more credible as a spiritual institution. And so the real short answer is, yeah, get it together because there will be busts. Well, that was an interesting comment. Somebody said the word practitioner. And I think you're using the term practitioner as compared to being the leader or the ayahuascaria. The rites are really, there's one instance I've got now where there is a really good lineage, and the ayahuascaria is Peruvian. If I move forward on that, and I will only do it once I'm convinced about the lineage and the practice in Peru, and that this is, there are people here who have done it in Peru and who have participated in the lineage who now want to be able to do it here. In the Santo Daime case, I was insistent on representing the leadership in Brazil as well as the local people. And so the best chance of success in this as a practitioner is you need to have an ayahuascario. You can't just, under our law today, you can't just become a practitioner and get busted and go free. It's not going to happen. So you need to, it needs to be, and I'm sorry that this is the status of the law, but there needs to be an institutional framework. Because where it leads to without that, which is where I think it should be, is the Ninth Amendment argument that we should all be able to do that which we choose to do with our bodies as long as we are not hurting others. But for what you're saying, you need to get it together, and you need to have a shaman, and he needs to have a lineage.
We have time for one more question. Next.
I kind of want to make a statement. I think that, no, it'll be a question, but you know, these are mystery schools that we're speaking of. And in terms of protection, I think that the level of mystery and quiet is our best protection, you know, keeping things kind of quiet. And the languaging that we use is extremely important, and I back Bea up in what she said, Stephen, because I had always understood ayahuasca as a visioning experience, as opposed to a hallucination. And I say that because then I thought of everything as kind of real. And the kind of question I wanted to ask you, I don't know if there's time to get into it, is, you know, what if you are visited by beings, entities, spirits that tell you things that you think, oh my God, you know, what is this? Who is this? We haven't learned, or maybe we have, this is the kind of question I was going to ask, how do we take this into cognitive therapy? How do we understand in the psychological framework that we have the realms of the astral and the spiritual world so that we know how to integrate them? And I know that's a big question, and it could be a whole other conference.
Thank you. Any comments on that?
I think the only way we have to talk about it is through metaphors. So it really comes down to the art of reporting our experiences and the persuasiveness of that, and ask yourself, if I act as if such and such were true, what would my world be like? That's where the cash value of it all comes down to. I think it really is. These are really real questions.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone in this room, the panelists in particular, of course, for making this weekend, and the people sitting in the audience too, for making this weekend so wonderful. I had a fantastic time, and I learned an awful lot, and I feel really good. So, that's what Horizons, I think, is about. Come join us next year, volunteer, email me or Kevin. I want to thank Kevin. So thank you very much again for coming and for sharing our mission. Participate with us over the year. It's not just a once-a-year thing. We do it really all year long, planning and whatnot. And the panelists, I just can't thank you enough for joining us and for sharing, as I said before, your hearts and minds. And I hope we've created a dialogue here, a multi-log that will continue. Please feel free to get their email addresses and contact, and we're going to, grow this thing over time. So we'll see you next year for our 6th anniversary. Thank you.